Dev,
Good morning, sir.
we're back.
We are back.
It's been too long. I say that every time. We need to do this like back to back to back to back.
No, but you left, so we try to get it in when we can.
Once or twice a quarter, I will be here. I promise. Got some new notes to talk about on unwinding the market. See what's going on in the market. It is heating up, as you know. J&J back in the news. I read a story the other day that said they don't think of acquisitions in years; they think of them in decades, which I thought was appropriate based on their last couple. I know you've worked with Abiomed, which we'll talk about in a minute, that they acquired, and now Shockwave.
Yep.
They acquired Shockwave for $335 per share in cash. Shockwave, the first to market intravascular lithotripsy technology for coronary artery disease and peripheral artery disease. When I was a director of sales at Cardiovascular Systems, we competed against them.
Yep.
And I'll talk about that here in a minute. But total addressable market, Shockwave saying, of $6 billion. They paid $13.1 billion for them, right? So they're going to grow that over a long period of time, obviously.
Yep.
And I think the market's somewhere around $200 million, if I recall right now. So exciting times for J&J as they continue to acquire companies. Boston Scientific, of course, was in the news with Exonics, which I'm not sure if that deal's been quite finalized yet. It's being looked into, but that was $71 per share, $3.7 billion deal. What's interesting is we're seeing the deals in 2024 with the big Bs in front of them. Last year was 150 million here, 250 million there. All that dry powder is starting to be used.
Exactly.
And I'm excited about it, and I know you are too, because that means we get to help continue to build and integrate these companies together.
Yeah. And the integration part that you just mentioned is probably the trickiest when these acquisitions happen. And we've seen firsthand with companies you mentioned like Abiomed. We've been a partner of theirs for decades, between Joe and the former CEO and chairman Mike Minogue. So been with them from hundreds of employees to thousands of employees, and now they're part of J&J. And the integration part is such a unique aspect of these acquisitions, especially if they play outside of the typical domain expertise of the parent company.
Sure.
And we were speaking about this earlier today, and we hear it from candidates in the market all the time, is, originally, when you think of J&J, and I think still today, when you think of J&J, the first thing that doesn't come to your mind is interventional cardiology. But as you start to see their moves over the last 2 years, but then even over the last 5 years, they're starting to play more and more in that space and have assets under management in that space, specifically like a Biosense Webster, like an Abiomed, and now like a Shockwave. And I don't think they're done yet in 2024. So that's a little nugget for the future. But now they're starting to really be able to play in those spaces. And the interesting thing is that they're moving away from these full integrations on the talent side, where they buy a company, they integrate it into their engineering, to their commercial, to their operation platform, and now it's just part of their ecosystem.
That's right. Buy something proven. And let them keep doing what they were doing.
Correct.
Right?
Exactly.
So if it's not broke, don't fix it. Give them the resources they need from the large amount that you have.
Correct.
And let them keep running. And, Shockwave was one of those companies. I was at CSI, Cardiovascular Systems, when they came out. And everybody's talking about, it's too big of a French size to be used in certain areas of the anatomy. Guess what? The product works. Doctors love it because it's easy and it's convenient. And they did something revolutionary where they didn't really pick on the competition or try to outsell, Rotablator at Boston or Diamondback at CSI. They would actually work together with these companies and say, hey, let's prep the vessel, let's prep the artery with our technologies combined. So they were doing hashtag Rotablast on Twitter, hashtag sandblasting with CSI. I'd never seen anything like it.
Great marketing.
And it's incredible marketing. And I mean, I think their followers, usurped ours at CSI like quickly, because they were just doing incredible marketing. And so now J&J buys a company like that. And what do you inherit? You inherit, what are you buying? You're not just buying the technology, you're buying the people that designed and grew that technology, the engineers, the quality people, the regulatory people, everybody that you need in your organization for that particular, peripheral artery disease, coronary artery disease. And so I think that's genius to buy them and let them keep running. Just like when we hire people a lot of times here at the Mullings Group, we hire good people and we let them run, right? You give them a framework and you give them the resources, but you let them keep doing what they're doing.
Yeah, because there's enough evidence on the alternate side of that coin, right? With all the robotic platforms that have been acquired, you know, minimally invasive laparoscopy procedures over the last few years, and who knows where they are? I mean, they're in a dungeon somewhere.
Right.
So
Intuitive bought their IP, and
correct.
they'll use it when and if needed.
Yeah, allowing them to do what they do. They're a wholly owned subsidiary underneath the parent company. So if you and I go to work for one of these companies, yes, we know that they're part of the J&J ecosystem, but our day-to-day is going to be focused on that sub, whether it's Abiomed, whether it's Shockwave, whether it's Biosense Webster. So that's an interesting component, you know, when you're evaluating companies like this that, you know, and we've seen it's kind of like a larger PE model almost, where, you know, if you're coming in as a director or a VP of R&D or a VP of commercials, whatever the case is, and you do a really great job at that business, right, that business unit, who knows, 2 years from now, J&J makes another acquisition and you've made your role so concrete and the team is humming so well, they might tap you on the shoulder and say, hey, Ryan, we just made this new acquisition. It's a smaller company. We want you to do to that company what you did with our previous acquisition. And that's something we see a ton of when we're talking to candidates on the PE side is you come in, you do a good job, you get integrated into that PE network, and then your options become, you know, much more open from there because they're acquiring businesses, they're acquiring revenue generating businesses,
and they're acquiring brands, right? So these early stage companies are doing such a great job of establishing their brand early on that a lot of times it makes sense to leave that alone. Right? They've sometimes, because they can work a little faster and looser because they're not in such a structured and litigious environment as an early stage company, they are posting more on social, right? You get to the larger companies, every social post has to be approved. Well, you're operating at a disadvantage when your competition's able to post pictures of cases and really run fast and loose. So I think that's an important consideration, you know, whether it's, you know, Abiomed, a J&J company, Shockwave, a J&J company, you know, Boston Scientific, who is also a company we just talked about, they will traditionally roll those companies in under their umbrella. So maybe we'll see that start to change. Yeah, absolutely. Let's tackle some of our other topics here as we transition. I want to talk about the we, me, they that came up in our conversation the other day, and how, you know, when we talk to individuals about going to companies, we ask them to do two things for us. We say, tell us what you have done. So did you grow the market share from this percentage to this? Did you support this initiative or that initiative? That's what you did. But more importantly, how did you do it? So we can show that you have transferable skills to the startups that we're building. Because on paper, if you're at a mid cap or a large strategic, you're probably not going to look great at all times for a startup that says, hey, we want a proven startup person. Maybe you've integrated startup technology, so you've done the same thing but in reverse. Or maybe you're doing things operating in a silo at a large company that is very much startup-like, creating comp plans, you know, supporting a CRM system onboarding. All those things startups need. So let's talk about the we, me, they that you've been through and how that's been helpful.
I mean, exactly like you said, I mean, it's helpful for any size company to really get an understanding as to what that individual's total contribution to a particular project or function has been over the years. But especially if you're in a mid-sized company or a large strategic and you're a director or a manager and you're looking for that ascension and you might be blocked there. So you think, okay, I'll go to a smaller company where there is that opportunity. That's, I mean, the startup will look at a profile like that and say, okay, how many other managers are there? How many other people are doing what this individual is doing? And from a resume perspective, you're not necessarily tailoring every resume that you send out for that specific opportunity, right? So
that's hard.
It's hard and it's time consuming. So when you're in that interview, we've had some really unique feedback and success with this. The style is, you know, tailor your experience to the we, me, they approach in the sense that, you know, we as a team were tasked to do X, and this is what that yielded. me personally, as the director of engineering, as the director of operations, my role specifically in that was project management, budget management, owning vendor relationships, keeping people on track, whatever your specific function was within that project.
Yeah.
Because in the smaller or mid-sized companies' eyes, now they're seeing, okay, this person isn't past the point of being hands-on technical, which you're going to need to have. And closest to the broom sweeps, we talk about that all the time in these smaller companies. So you need to be hands-on, and you can't be so far down that leadership path where you have teams of 50, 60 people, and it's all delegation and 100% strategy. Because in a startup, it'll never be 100% strategy. So you've proven what your technical capabilities are with the me. You've proven what your leadership capacity and the strategic side of your background is with the we as a team. And then also demonstrating the they part in terms of these are the cross-functional assets and leaders that I brought in as sponsors to this specific project. Here's why I needed them. Here's how I convinced them that this is in benefit for the entire organization. And then you paint the full rounded picture that a startup can sit back and say, wow, okay, so we're talking to this person as a director of engineering. Okay, great. But look at all the things that they've done outside of purely engineering that we can leverage their experience in our 20-person, startup.
Yep. That's exactly the point, right? Is to find people coming into these startups that are multifaceted in their skill sets, because you don't have the resources at a startup that you do at a larger company. Not even the resources you have at a mid-cap. I was talking to a commercial leader the other day, and he said, Ryan, I'm essentially sales, marketing, market development, operations. And you want to talk about getting a great deal. First of all, startups can't typically pay what the large strategics pay. What they can do is probably elevate your title from an ascending director to a VP to a CCO. So you're going to get that title bump. What they can also do is give you some equity. So they are rewarding you, but you can't pay your mortgage with a title and with equity. So what you have to be really willing to do is say, I'm willing to take on these new skill sets, and the value that brings me in my career now and into the future is worth the risk. It's worth to bet my career on. It's worth it to see who I become here. And even if you fail by society's terms, you win in terms of the skills that you've now acquired. And so many people we talk to that have been through that, they look at themselves and they're like, yeah, that one didn't work out. And they're really hard on themselves. And then you fast forward 6 months and they're in another elevated role, and everything they went through before has helped them where they're at now. And they hit the ground running. Because you don't know what you don't know. So that takes me to my next point here. Who is the hiring team? Why are they on the hiring team? And has that worked in the past? Because there's need to have people in the process, and there's nice to have. But we need to have alignment on the role, and I know you've got some examples of that. But one point I'll make before I toss it back to you is, if there's people in the process that you're going to interact with every day, or on a regular basis, they should be part of that interview process. If there's people that just kind of want to check the box and say they got to meet you, that's great. Maybe those are people you meet when you're onboarding and not during the interview process, because anytime something gets drawn out, and we'll get into this later, I mean, we'll hire people and then, it's 2 weeks if we're lucky, but usually 4 weeks, sometimes 8 weeks, sometimes 12 weeks before the start date. And recency bias sets in, and that's a whole nother topic we'll touch on too. But let's go back to who's the hiring team? Why has it worked in the past, and why that alignment is so important?
That's definitely something before the talent access team, internal, external, whatever the case may be. But before we go to market to look for a director of engineering, just using it as an example, making sure that everyone on that team, CEO, VP of engineering, VP of manufacturing, we all have the same understanding of the role and why we need it and what this person is going to come in to do. Now, certainly the different functions will have different ways that they use that person, and that person is going to interact with them that they can discuss during the interview. But making sure that there's 100% alignment, because if you're an A player going into an interview and you're hearing these different mixed messages as to, well, my interpretation of the role is indexing heavier towards contract manufacturing management and ownership. And then you talk to another individual and they say, we really need this role because we want to bring manufacturing in-house. You sit back and say, I'm hearing two different things from leaders in this organization. Is this really for me? And as much as the individual needs to sell themselves in this process, if you're recruiting A players and you're a smaller company, you need to also sell the individual. And the one critical way you do that is through harmonization and alignment of what that role means, so that every time they speak to someone in your organization, they come back saying they spoke the same language as that person.
That's right. And you validate it, right?
You validate it.
You validate it through feedback, through surveys, right? We ask every individual that goes through our process, what was it like? Could we have done better? And a lot of them write unsolicited recommendations for us. So that's our proof that we're doing what we need to do. Same thing on our client side. And I wrote something down because you said alignment on the role, and I'm thinking, okay, if I wanted to be aligned at the Mullings Group and I wanted to tell a new hire here, what is it we do here at the Mullings Group? Well, executive search, obviously, media, got our own media and production studio, and advisory services. That's it. Those are the three things that we do, and here's how we do them. Same process with our clients, right? What do you do? Why is it better than the gold standard? Why should I bet my career on your company, right? Who will I become here? And the candidate experience that we're talking about is of the utmost importance, because if that experience isn't good, they're going to look at that as, well, if this is what it's like interviewing, what's it going to be like when I work here?
Yeah. And I mean, those questions that you ask, they are known inside the four walls of that organization. And it sometimes feels, if you have to explain that maybe this person isn't interested, or maybe they're not the right person, but you have to also take yourself, the recency bias, out of that equation and say, I know what we're doing here. Using the Mullings Group, I know that what we do is great, but someone who is coming into the organization or is interviewing and they've done their diligence and they know peripherally what we do, like, we also have to explain to them why it's important, who our client base is, why we differentiate ourselves from other folks. So
what our values are.
What our values. During that interview process, it's really important to be able to answer those questions to people.
Yeah, we just had that high performance management system training with Bernie Haffey from Haffey and Company, and I've been through a lot of trainings in my corporate career. And what was nice is,
you've created them,
and I've created them, and I've presented them. But mine have been more on the side of leadership development and probably some stuff that Joe would consider touchy-feely. None of the trust falls or anything like that. But when you get into running your business like a manufacturing organization and tackling ideas in a very processed way, that's when the light bulb starts to go off. Here's the mission of our company. Here's our values. Here's our vision for the future. And if we run into an issue, here's how we solve it. And by the way, in a timely manner. And where I'm going with this is, we can use this same high performance management system with our clients, and we can use it with candidates. So each individual we deal with, if we are doing our job, they should be, what we learned in the training, a delighted customer, right? So we're either delighting our client or the candidate, or in a perfect world, both, and it should be. Because when it is, that's when the offer gets made. And I want to talk about now what we mentioned twice already is the recency bias. I've got a client that has a training class coming up, but it's out a couple months. We're interviewing now proactively, but you hire somebody and you need to post-date that offer, so you lock them in, but then you got to stay close to them for the next 2 months. That's really hard to do. We're here to facilitate a decision. Once that offer gets signed, of course, we're going to stay in touch with that individual, but our job in a lot of ways ends there. So we need to coach our clients to stay close to that person. Otherwise, recency bias is going to set in, and what we mean by that is, who are they going to be talking to the most over the next 2 months? Is it the person that just hired them that doesn't have a training class for 2 months? Or is it going to be the person that they're working with every day that they've been working with for the past 5-10 years, right? So take me through a scenario that you've kind of been through recently on that topic.
I mean, I would say 70% of the job is done when they sign on the dotted line. And I think a lot of people think it's 100% and it's a done deal. And we talk so much about A players. If you're an A player and you're working at a mid to large company and you've been through their leadership program and you have colleagues that you've worked with for a number of years, and perhaps the hiring man or perhaps your manager is a mentor and maybe even a friend. I mean, that's a heavy weight as you another weight the next 3 weeks before you start, or maybe in a month.
You're nervous the whole, how am I going to tell them?
Terrified, right? I mean,
What's she going to say?
Yeah, you don't want to let people down. So much in terms of keeping that constant cadence and harmonization between the hiring team and the individual that goes on during a successful interview process needs to continue in some way before that person starts. And there's a number of ways you can do that. I mean, obviously they want to wrap things up at their current organization, and they don't want to allocate too much time to a new company before they even start.
Yeah.
But simple things that we've seen have worked really well. So schedule, if they're local, scheduling a dinner, a week or two after they've accepted the offer. Hey, Thursday night, Friday night, after your day at work, let's meet, let's grab dinner, just talk shop and start to build that camaraderie, right? So that's one checkpoint. Another checkpoint is having members from the executive team that were part of that process, just phone call, email, text, hey, congratulations, would love to take 5-10 minutes just to catch up, over the next couple of weeks. When are you available? All right, so now you have leadership bought in. You have a dinner with the hiring manager.
Yeah, you feel
HR,
wanted. You feel like you're being courted.
Correct.
Almost.
Yeah, and then HR touches base with you, and we're starting to put together your onboarding plan. Do you prefer Mac? Do you prefer PC? Internet reimbursement? Like little things here and there, and it does two things. So it confirms the buy-in that you thought you had all the way along. If that constant cadence from the individual keeps up, and it takes away from some of the recency bias because they're having conversations with their existing hiring manager, but they're also continuing to talk to you and remembering all the reasons why they started looking in the first place. So that's the best case scenario.
Right.
But the worst case scenario is also something you can observe is their behavior. And have they changed since they ended the interview process and signed the offer?
Yeah.
If it took them less than 24 hours to get back to an email or a call or a text before, but now you're starting to see it's taking a couple days and the communication style is becoming short. I mean, your spidey senses start to go up and you get the feeling in the gut that something's wrong.
Yep.
So you can pressure test that too, because it'll also make you start to see, okay, we're not as 100% sure if John is going to join us. But we also had Bill and Sally in this interview process as strong 1B and 1Cs. Maybe we should re-engage them just to make sure if something happens here, we have somebody, the person that we would like to hire outside of John is still available.
Yeah, always have a backup plan. Yep. But focusing on your number one should be the backup plan, right?
100%.
You've, as the client, have put in all that time and effort, right? Everybody was aligned. You had the whole need to have in the interview process versus nice to have. So you as a client, too, look in the mirror and say, we put in all this work over 3 months. We're judged on a quarterly basis on how we grow our business. We need this A player to help us do that. We don't want all this work to go to waste either. Yeah. So the work isn't done is the moral of the story at the offer acceptance.
Sure.
I would agree that 70% is probably where you're at. And I wrote down another thing here as you were talking about the counters. And it's, when it's time to resign, as the individual, remind yourself, like you said, why were you looking in the first place? And then also, did you put in all that work over the last, call it 3 months, because that's really how long it takes on average. The average process can take 2 to 3 months between aligning everybody's schedules, putting in your notices, things of that nature.
Yep.
That's a lot of work to put in to just go back to the company that you wanted to leave in the first place. So the question is, why did you want to leave? And what are they doing that makes you want to stay? That recency bias, right? The words of affirmation that you needed in the previous time, it's now coming.
Yeah. Okay,
great. Is that going to stay? And, what are you being promised? Is it a title bump? Is it a compensation bump? Is it still selling the same technology or representing the same technology as before? Okay, well, you told us you wanted something that's going to change the market.
Yeah.
That's going to change your career. You wanted to fill those gaps on your resume that you can't fill at your current company. So it's just the reminder of why are we doing this in the first place. So something we deal with every day that, this is kind of a peek behind the curtain that maybe a lot of people don't think about, but certainly something that's on our mind on
Yeah,
a daily
and
basis.
I'd like to ask you something because you've sat in the seat as an executive in a med tech company, so you've had these conversations with people on your team that come to you and say, "Hey, Ryan, it's been great working with you. I've learned a ton. I'm taking a job at X company." So how do you handle that as a hiring manager? To also make sure that the brand of your organization stays as clean and intact as possible while preparing for someone to leave.
Yeah, it's a tough one, especially if you let your ego get in the way. So the question I would always ask myself is, have I done everything to support this person in their career while they're under my leadership? And if you haven't, that's a tough pill to swallow. Luckily, I didn't deal with a ton of turnover in my professional career. I was the guy coming in building the teams, so they had a loyalty to me, I had a loyalty to them and their family. But sometimes you inherit people too that don't align with your value. And when those people have come and said, "Hey, I'm choosing to do something different," we kind of both saw it coming, and you wish them well.
Yeah.
You never burn a bridge because you're going to run into these people again, and you exit them with grace and support even.
Yeah.
And so when people come to you as a leader and say, "Hey, this is me, this is what I'm doing," great. Dig a little deeper and find out why they're leaving and if there was anything you could have done differently. And what I found out sometimes is it's not a question of leadership in an organization. It's just where the organization is going as a whole. So I'll give you an example. There's a lot of good med device companies out there that have been, mid-market share leaders for most of their career. They treat their people well. They've got good products, but they don't tend to innovate, right? They just become stagnant. People want to sell new products. The lifeblood of any salesperson is new technology. So if an organization doesn't have that and somebody wants to leave, can you blame them?
Yeah.
That would be like here at the Mullings Group if we said, we're good. We've placed over 9,000 people at 900 companies over the past 30 years. We have our own media and production studio. We're speaking on panels. We're busy enough.
Yeah.
But that's not what we're doing. We're working with private equity companies. We're working with venture capital. We're building an Asia Pacific team with AJ. We acquired MJ Moore and Associates at the end of Q4 last year to bolster our commercial efforts. We're not stopping. Dragonfly Media is growing like a weed. We're probably going to have somebody representing them on the commercial side to help Nicole out.
Yeah.
So that's the type of organization that we are, and that's what people look at in medtech too, is are they elevating their game? Is there evolution as an organization, or are we stagnant? And really that's what it comes down to. People get bored in their career.
Yeah.
They want a challenge, and then we come in. And it's usually not a question of talent. A lot of people in this space are talented. Does the timing line up with where they're at in that season of life? And I think that'll be a good topic for us to tackle on our next podcast episode is talent and timing, and how when those coincide, maybe give some case study examples of big things that happen.
Yeah, and one thing you mentioned there, great on you that you didn't have a lot of turnover. It's a reflection of your leadership. But you said in the times that you did, you could tell rather quickly based off of the values, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's something that gets a little overlooked during an interview process on the organization side, to really make sure that the individuals that are coming in, especially, if you're a 10-person company, you can call yourself whatever you want, VP, CCO, CEO, you're doing everything, right? Closest to the broom sweeps. You're doing marketing, you're doing logistics, you're doing supply chain. You're the one doing everything, right? 10-person company. So the technical stuff, yes, you need to have that. But culture, values, how important is that to come out and say, this is our company, these are the values that we have as an organization. Tell me how these align with yours, and give me some examples of, maybe it's 1 through 5. It's a ranking scale. Certainly there's some things that you can't rank, right? Ethics being one.
Right.
It's either a 1 or a 0. You have it or you don't. So, walking someone through that process, how important is that for a small company?
Day one, it's huge. If you walk in and say you're a frontline manager and you're leading a team, and most people will agree that these frontline managers are some of the most important roles in the company, because you're managing a large number of people that help support the organization. So something we would do at a lot of companies that I was fortunate enough to be with is you would have a region meeting right when you would start.
Yep.
You'd bring all your people in and say, these are the values of this region. But guess what? I'm not telling you what they are. I'm going to make sure that you weigh in on these values. Do you feel these are important? And you mentioned ethics and integrity, right? It's a 1 or a 0.
Yeah.
Either have it or you don't. So that's a value I think everybody can agree on.
Sure.
But what beyond that, right, is sense of urgency important. Here we have a thing called logo team self, right? The logo's TMG. The team is us. Self is last, right? You need to be selfless. You get everybody to weigh in so that they'll buy in, right? And maybe you share a book that you were passionate about that kind of changed your career. For me, you know, I've read a lot of John Gordon. I've read a lot of John Maxwell. A lot of Johns in there. A lot of Tim Ferriss.
Yeah.
But when I would have meetings, I would let people know that your voice is important. Like, what are you struggling with? What's been a challenge with you in your career before I got here?
Yeah.
How can I help? And then I do what I say I'm going to do.
Yeah.
Period. And then I let people know too, I know you have a family. Your job's what you do. It's not who you are.
Yeah.
Now it's a big part of who you are because you're there so often, but how can I make your job more enjoyable? So for me, in med device as a leader, there's a lot of administration in these companies.
Yeah.
And when you're behind a desk, you're not selling a lot. So somebody in charge of revenue, I would say, hey, let's keep it real simple. I'll take care of a lot of the admin, a lot of the reports, anything like that. You go out and do what you do best. And then when we get in the field together, we support customers. I move the business forward at dinners or society meetings. And then we have fun at the end of the day. Work hard, play hard.
Yeah.
And then, you know, have a quarterly meeting, take them to a concert, go to a ball game.
Yeah.
That's how you build camaraderie. Like every time I come to town, you and I go to, what is it, El Camino, and have tacos at lunch.
Yeah.
That's like one of my favorite things every time I come to town. So hopefully that explains a little bit about how you can build the culture and values.
Yeah, 100%. Great.